Hello to everyone, even those who haven't seen and mentioned. Thank you very much for being with us. This is the last day of our September session. And of course, we have an important item which will take most of the agenda today, which is engagement team and group audits. Before we do that, there are two things I would like to do. The first is to approve the minutes from the June session. You have seen this, and I do not know if there are any comments yet to be considered. If there are, please say so. Anyone? I don't see anyone. Cam, do you see anyone raising a hand?
No, I don't see anyone either.
No. So may I ask for approval of the minutes of the June session as it has been circulated? This is the public session, and I will see, please raise your hand if you do not approve. So silence and doing nothing means approval. And I think we have that. It means consent. So, very good. Thank you very much. The other item we have to talk about is something that we left from our previous discussion on the tax planning project proposal. We had a discussion, of course, and there were several, last Friday that was, and there were several comments made, and the task force has come back, the working group, excuse me, has come back with a newer version that has adjusted for various comments. So may I turn to Jens to make a brief presentation and see if we can proceed to approve the project proposal today. Jens.
Thank you very much, Stavros. Yes, I will be very brief. Next slide, please. The purpose and objective of the session is to consider and approve the revised project proposal following our discussion on the board on September 7th. We have tried as a working group to consider every input given during the last board meeting, and we would like to remind that this is a project proposal and not a final wording for code enhancement or change. So please give us input on a fatal flaw basis, and thank you very much to those of you who have given advance input. Some of that input we could use for the revised version now. Other input is more food for thoughts of a future task force, less for the project proposal. So I will now, on the next slide, raise the 6 issues we have taken as a board feedback from the last board meeting. So first, we would like to adjust the public interest outcome. Second, we talked about applicability for PIs and non-PIs. Thirdly, the tax morality, social justice issue. The fourth issue is the question of the intent test. Then some issues of terminologies, and last but not least, local laws and jurisdictions. In this row, I would like to show and explain very briefly the changes we have made. Next slide, please. The public interest outcome. Here you see we have adjusted it to the last public interest paper from the PIOB from August 2021. So the wording is now adapted to the actual version. So you see that, for example, the notion of social justice, which was a point of discussion we had, is now deleted, and we have now taken the actual wording from the PIOB paper. Next slide, please. Here is the other part of our project proposal, where we are referring to the public interest. Also here we have made some actual changes. And you see under C, and was something I have taken just as a brief recommendation from one of the board members, which I would support, is to delete under C the word services and just to keep in relation to tax planning, because it's relevant for public accountant in business too, and they are not providing services, they are doing tax planning. So perhaps this is an actual change I would like to recommend to take. On the next slide, we have changed the headings from scope to scope and limitations. And we have added here the PI, non-PI issue, and you can see and read that at a principal level, the provisions will be equally applicable to PIs and non-PIs. However, the task force may consider a distinction between PIs and non-PIs might be a relevant factor for PA's assessment. On the next slide, the tax morality and social justice issue or discussion point. And we have added here in brackets a sentence as distinct from giving due regard to concerns for stakeholders and the wider public, consistent with the professional's responsibility to act in the public interest. And on the next slide, the intent test, we have understood that the notion of the intent test might lead to a misunderstanding. So we have changed a little bit the wording. We have highlighted that we are acting in the context of the fundamental principles, and have then adjusted a little bit the text that the project will explore the following approach for PAs, and then obtain an understanding of rationale for the particular tax scheme. And we have deleted the intent, and we think that with rationale we have covered all the issues. And the last bullet point, if there is no indication or perception of unacceptable tax. So we have also here changed the wording. The next slide, on the same issue, we have also added a sentence concerning PAIBs, and we have repeated under the last bullet point on that slide the rationale for a particular tax scheme, structure, or transaction. On the next slide, the issues of terminology, we have changed the wording into, while this project proposal, that the project proposal is using acceptable and unacceptable, it is the task of the task force to explore whether these terms are suitable for the code and can be appropriately described, or whether other terminology should be developed. So we have here an open scenario that the task force is able to make its own assessment and discuss this then during the project with the board. And the last main issue, the local laws and jurisdictions, we have highlighted and made clear that the project proposal is not, and the project is not intending to override laws and regulations, and including any anti-avoidance rules prevailing in a given jurisdiction, and that there is respect to national sovereignty and local laws and regulations. We have also added the reference to 100.7A1 of the code, which is dealing with the different levels and jurisdictions, and to say the general provision that if there's a if two provisions are different, we have the rule in 107A1. But also here we have to make clear that we don't want to enter in debates on tax policy, and it is very important that the code is jurisdiction neutral, so that it is applicable in jurisdictions where the tax burden is high or where it's low. So there should be no judgment over any national laws and regulation. So that, in a nutshell, are the main changes we are proposing. And now I would like to ask you whether there are any other points to raise, or whether you have, on a fatal flaw basis, issues which you would like to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens, for a very clear presentation of the changes that came about after the board discussion. Let me invite people, members, if they have points or questions, please. Raise hands.
I see Ken.
Well, let's start with Lisbeth.
Thank you, Stavros. Thank you, Jens. I really appreciate the changes that are being made. Well done, working group. I have a couple of questions. I have 3 points, actually. First of all, with regards to that addition, second bullet, new paragraph 17, the approach, where it's talking about the tax morality. I think it's your slide 7, if I noted it correctly. Yeah, that addition between the brackets, and it's a little bit unclear what exactly it means, especially in that context of tax morality. And I was hoping that you would explain it a little bit on the slide, but that didn't happen. And also that construct then followed by the however. So I'm a little bit lost in that paragraph, to be honest. My second point relates to the practical level, and that's your slide 8, where it refers to previously the intent test. I'm extremely happy that that is gone, so fully supportive of it. I was just wondering whether there's something missing, though, because it just says obtain an understanding of the rationale. And I'm wondering whether that understanding then, similarly to the next bullet or line item, it should be linked to the fundamental principles, that understanding, to address whether ethical behavior was demonstrated, yes or no. So link that to the application of the conceptual framework, because now it hangs there. You obtain an understanding, but it doesn't say what is the intention with that understanding. And then my last one, and that's really more minor, but because of the fact that you have added scope and limitations, I think you can remove that focus heading as well, because it's also about the scope and the limitations. So just remove it, and then you have a nice flow under scope and limitations. So 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisbeth. I see Caroline Camp. Caroline Lee.
Thank you. Thanks, Jens, and thanks to the working group. Like Lisbeth, I'm happy for the changes that have been made. They were responsive to our comments in our earlier meeting. Just on this this slide 8, the first sentence talks about guidance to assist the PA in identifying what might be deemed acceptable or unacceptable tax planning behavior in the context of the fundamental principles. And I think we should focus on the fundamental principles and the fundamental principles such as integrity, objectivity, and professional behavior in the context of professional activities related to tax planning, so as to move away from what is deemed acceptable or unacceptable tax planning. And then it's about the project exploring the approach to identifying threats to compliance with the fundamental principles. I think if that is added at the end of the first sentence or the second sentence, then it would make it clearer what we are trying to achieve, which is in relation to identifying threats to the PA's compliance with the fundamental principles. Thank you.
Thank you. Cam, do you see any other member before Ken takes the floor?
Rich Huskin.
Yes, Rich, please.
Yes, thank you. And Jens, thank you for your explanations and the advancement on this. I have to echo Carolyn's comments. I still find concern that the concept of defining acceptable and unacceptable tax planning has not been eliminated from the project plan. And I don't find that as something that we're going to be very successful at doing. And I'd rather the focus be on ethical compliance with the fundamental principles themselves. That's all. Thank you.
And Galen?
During the discussion, I raised the during the discussion, I raised the question about a threshold issue, and that whether a tax position taken by the PA, if challenged in court or by a jurisdictional, a taxing authority, for example, unless it can be sustained. I mean, I think that sort of speaks to the acceptable and the unacceptable. If there's not a likelihood or a high probability, wherever you might place that probability, I think there's going to be some ethical issues. So I'll repeat that comment. I think a threshold issue needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Galen. Cam, do you see any other member?
No other hands, Ken, except for Ken.
Ken, please.
I have one comment and maybe one response to one of the points Caroline has raised, but I will let Jens address the other members' comments. My one comment is on paragraph 16, and it's a cross-reference to paragraph 14, which should be to paragraph 13. I think it is a typo. So Carla, maybe you can correct that cross-reference. I don't know if you can go to the slide where it refers to paragraphs 13, 14, and 16 towards the end. Yeah. So the reference to paragraph 14 in paragraph 16 should be to paragraph 13, because that is referring to the override of laws and regulations. So what 16 should really be hooked to is 13, not 14. It is a typo, so that can be updated. I guess my quick reaction to one of the points Karen has raised, which is to really link the approach to the identification of threats to the fundamental principles. I would just caution that the approach should not be entirely focused on solely the identification of threats to the fundamental principles. Clearly, that should be a central focus of the provisions that will be developed. But that should not be the only focus, because what the project proposal sets out is, if you will, a guidance to think about how to navigate a particular situation, including actions, options that might be available to the individual professional accountant or firm, including internal consultation, including a consideration of uncertainties, including communication with tax authorities and those charged with governance. So it is a lot broader than just a narrow focus on the identification of threats to the fundamental principles. So let's bear that in mind and not inadvertently narrow the project to only focusing on identification of threats to the fundamental principles. So that's just a caution that we should not tie the project to target right from the start.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Any other member, please? Do you see anybody? Cam, any other?
No other hands raised, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Jens, before you respond, I would like to make a comment as well. First of all, I think that in my perception, you have this proposal responds to the vast majority of the comments that were made, including my own. Secondly, I would like to say that I want to echo, I was about to say what Ken just said, namely that the focus on threats to the fundamental principles is too narrow. We're looking about using the fundamental principles and the conceptual structure to look at situations that may be difficult. And in that connection, I agree with Ken, but in that connection, I would only suggest that in paragraph 17, where you're saying that where you're talking at one of the indents there on uncertainty about legislative intent behind tax laws and regulations, I would weave in there complexity as well, because I really think that complexity is a matter that we need to talk about given the different tax situations, especially for transnational transactions. And it's something we are also, it's a concept that links also with what we do in technology. That's my only comment. And my other comment is at the end, this is not the project proposal itself, it's the list of parties to be consulted with. And of course, I think that there are two parties missing there. One is the Forum of Firms, I think, and the other is corporate governance people. And I would suggest that we include those in the list of possible consulting parties to consult with, stakeholders. That's all. But thank you very much for the good work. Back to you now.
Mr. Chairman, I see Caroline as well.
Oh, yes. Caroline.
Sorry. Yeah. Jens, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but there's in paragraph 26, so there's an insertion that refers to technology project, and maybe if you can explain a bit more on which part of the technology project, because we are going to issue an exposure draft on the work that the technology task force is working on, and I'm just wanting to understand the timelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Not seeing anyone else, I revert to Jens.
Yes, thank you for all your comments. I will try to react to them in order of the slides, but perhaps I'm starting with the last point from Caroline and the last point from Stavros. I think the technology issue is especially the complexity issue, which will be in a kind mirrored in the technology task force proposals. And in this respect, we were as a working group in close communication and exchange, and I think we will do it if there is a task force in the next quarter to be sure that what the independence issues and complexity issues concerning technology is mirroring or in line with our first thoughts on complexity as Stavros has described it just a minute ago. So that was the idea specifically for complexity issues. And the other point, I think it's easy to add the Forum of Firms and corporate governance organizations. So I have no issues with that. And also the proposal, I think it was you, Caroline or Lisbeth, to delete focus as a heading. It's fine. I think is a better flow if you do not have this. Now I would start with slide number 7 and try to explain to you, Lisbeth, what we wanted to achieve with this sentence in brackets, we have said that the project proposal is not intending to deal with the broader theme of tax morality. We just want to state the issue that the whole discussion is coming from the notion that the profession has a responsibility to act in the public interest, and the task force will have to make clear it's not tax morality we are talking about, but the perception and the reaction the public have towards the profession acting in tax planning environment. So it is one of the factors which the professional accountant has to be aware of. That was the intent of that sentence. I think concerning the next slide, where we have given the connectivity to the fundamental principles, but also to mention acceptable or unacceptable tax planning. We didn't want to emphasize that this terminology is the right terminology, but you could also say the gray zone of tax planning, and that is just a wording issue. But I think, as Stavros and Ken have mentioned, the extant code has no concrete description of the possible thinking and challenges a professional accountant has. So that's why we thought that we mention acceptable and unacceptable, but the task force will look at the better wording, the final wording, and discuss this with the board. So that's why we thought it would be right to have this here. I have no problem to also add the conceptual framework as you, Lisbeth, have proposed here. So in the concept of the fundamental principles and applying the conceptual framework, that would be an adding, I think, which is correct. I think the complexity issue I mentioned, and the threshold issue, Galen, you mentioned. I think that is a very important point for the task for the working group. It is something we would like to give to the task force to consider whether it is in the end the terminology of acceptable or unacceptable, or whether there would be a test, a reasonable and informed third-party test, where the likelihood of being successful towards an critical tax authority, that might be the right test. But I think that is something, and that was our thinking, not to deny this, but to say that is something the working group should consider. I'm not sure whether I have now caught the points, but I think that would be my first reaction to your valid points and comments on this project proposal.
Thank you, Jens. I think we are converging on agreement here. Are there any additional remarks, please? Cam, you see?
I see Lisbeth.
Okay, Lisbeth?
Yeah, thank you, Jens, for that explanation on bit between brackets. But it sounds like it's a pretty important distinction between tax morality and the responsibility to act in the public interest. So the fact that it is between brackets and then followed by the however gives me, some concern. So could the working group perhaps see how you could clarify it better in that paragraph, that it's not about tax morality, but that it's rather about acting in the public interest?
So I think the possibility would be to make it at the last sentence of that bullet point without brackets, perhaps, that would clarify it, Lisbeth, if this is responsive to your concerns. I understand your concern, and perhaps having it as a full sentence and not in brackets would clarify that this is the main purpose. But I see Ken with a proposal probably.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. I was going to suggest maybe an easy, or maybe not easy, but a way to finesse this comment. And again, this is not the actual provisions. You know, this is just a project proposal. We could make it very clear that the project will seek to distinguish the concept of tax morality from the responsibility of the professional accountant to act in the public interest, because that's the crux of the issue. It's really separating the two. And if we can make that clear and pull it out as a separate sentence, whether it's at the end of it or at the start, you know, the point, as long as we make the point clear that the distinction is going to be critical right from the start, so that we are clear as to the focus of the way forward.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to add that this is a project proposal, of course, as Ken said, and the task force will have responsibility and degrees of freedom to clarify things, to change some things perhaps as they go on and so forth. So let's not get into the mindset that we are really making standards now. This is just a project proposal. And I think that the public interest objectives of this are very clear. And I agree, of course, that the distinction that Lisbeth mentioned is an important thing to be cleared up on the way. Kent. Anything else? No? So may I ask the board for their approval of the project proposal, subject to the responses that Jens has given about the few improvements that have to be made, to which I think those who suggested them agree. I have not heard any negative voice. So I'm asking for a show of hands on the project proposal, please. You have to show a hand to support the project proposal. This is not by silent consent. So let's show a hand, please. Oh, you can show a hand on the screen as well. That's better.
On the screen.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to find mine. I'm sorry.
And the reaction stuff, yeah.
Okay.
Yashu, your hand is raised.
Who?
Oh, Yashu, yeah. Okay, no, we can see her. Rich.
Any abstentions, please? I'm lowering hands. Any abstention, please? Please lower those who voted yes. Well.
And I have an approval from Kim.
We have an approval from Kim. So I guess it's unanimous from what I see, right?
I just want to confirm, Rich, I did not see your hand. Okay, Rich's hand is up now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. This is approved. And thank you, Jens, very much for that. The composition of the task force is the last matter to consider here. And my proposal is that after seeing the expressions of interest, which included all members of the working group, my proposal is that the working group as composed will continue as the task force. And I would like to ask Jens to chair this task force. It is my view that this task force may be strengthened by new members when they come aboard, beginning January. So, but for the moment, I believe that it would be perfectly satisfactory if we stayed with the metamorphosis of the of a working group into a task force. Okay? All right. Well, Jens, you have to carry on now as task force chair. The responsibilities change.
Thank you very much for this approval, and thank you very much for the proposal. And I think we, as a task force, will now start our work and will include all the very valid comments received today, but also in the process of coming to this point today. And we got a lot of fruitful thinking, and I hope for a lot of input. And we will try to find a balanced approach in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, you, Jens, and the members of the task force for all the work you did in order to create the basis for the new job, which is the job of the task force. Good luck and good work in your task. Thank you. We can now close that and move to the main item of the day. Sylvie has been patiently waiting for the closure of this conversation, but now is the time, Sylvie, to start. And I want to thank Denise Canavan, who is a member of this task force and is with us today. Thank you very much, Denise, for your work. And thank the other members of the task force, of course, for this. So, Sylvie, it's your microphone and your floor.
Thank you very much, Stavros. I think we will just wait a few seconds to get the slide deck on screen. And here it is. Okay, let me put that away. Okay, so let's move on to the first slide. So the objective of the session is really to give the board an update on the entire project on engagement team and group audit. And we will organize our session in different parts. We will first focus on everything related to the engagement team provisions. We will really focus on the changes, not on the definition that we believe are mostly done and that you have in your papers, but really in some of the changes that we are suggesting to put in the code, reflecting the board discussion of last time, and also the input that we receive from the quality management coordination from Lisbeth and IESBA on those parts. So the view for us is really to try to wrap up entirely the entire part related to the engagement in provision and reflecting ISA 220. I would say that most of the discussion will really be focused on group audits because this is really where the task force has spent most time working in coordination with the IESBA ISA 600 task force. So we will, of course, update you on all the coordination activities and spend some time on all the proposed change to address the independence consideration in a group audit. And we have here a few additions to the Stroman that we presented to you last time based on all the feedback that we received. And so we will go really have a walkthrough of the new proposed changes to explain the work of the task force. So both group auditors independence and also sometime on breaches related to group audits. And at the end, of course, we will discuss the agenda because our intent is still to approve an exposure draft in December. So let's move on to the next slide. So as I said, we will first discuss engagement team. I will re-highlight a few proposed amendment from the coordination with ISA, with IESBA, and how that might affect engagement team. Then focusing really on group audit, including some feedback we receive from the CAG, and at the end, the timeline. So let's move on to engagement team. So before we move on engagement team, I would say that most of the task force work this time on engagement team was not really to revise engagement team. When we presented to you last time, we had a few comments that were more editorial in nature, but you remember that actually most of our definitions are mirroring ISA 220. The position was that once we reach, a certain consistency, there is very little for us to modify. So the focus of the task force has really been more on the application material and some changes to the code. And to do those changes to the code, we took on board a list of comments that we received as part of the coordination project. So when we looked at all the comments received from coordination, we identified a few that I would say were really editorial in nature. And we made some edits to reflect mostly some changes in the vocabulary, expression. Really edits from quality management standards. So they are in some of our paragraphs in the code, in various parts of the code. You will see in all of the sections. So I will not walk you through those edits because it's really editorial. We had a number of comments about some conforming amendments. So particularly to really the expectation that all the glossary of terms and the term we use will be consistent with the revised definition. And we have done that. And we also received some other comments, and there is one in particular that the task force considered that they were out of scope for our project, and I will go to that in detail. So most of those comments from quality management coordination we took on board, and let me move on to the next slide. So on the definition of engagement team, so we have full alignment with ISQM1 and ISA 220 revised. Of course, we took the feedback from the ISA 600 task force, and we further developed some changes in the code application material. So we'll see that we are putting here on the deck a track change of the various paragraphs that we presented to you in our Strawman. They reflect the feedback from the board meeting in June. And they reflect also, as I say, comments from the, or input, I would say, from the coordination. And also we had the ISA 600 task force giving us some feedback. So we'll see that on engagement team and audit team, we, in addition to the definition, which is the ISA 220 definition, we are adding some application material with some examples. And the type of changes that we have made to make sure it is really consistent is it's really, I would say mostly editorial. And the example about a component auditor. So very, very few changes reflecting the comments received last June. Let's move on to the next page. Similarly, we made some additional comments. You remember we spent some time discussing that paragraph when we were giving some examples and scenarios. We reordered the 3 scenarios based on the feedback from the board meeting. And we were also adding some clarification, like depending on the nature of the consultation, when we were talking about the individuals who are consulting on the engagement and who are not member of the engagement team, but could be members of the audit team. So green is relocation, and red are the edits that we have done. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, those are, I would say, that I presented were the only changes that we made. The other topic that I wanted to raise is on the list of input that we received from the QM coordination. We had suggestions to redefine or make some changes in the definition of a network firm, because there are, you know, that there are some differences in the way ISQM and IESBA define a network firm. So we looked at the changes, and we thought the task force that even if we consider that making some changes could have some merit, the definition, or looking at the definition of a network firm and exploring the consequence of the change is outside the project scope of group audits. We do not change network firm. I mean, we were not at all looking at that definition or the application material on the network firm. And in particular, in the way network firms are applying quality management policies and procedures. So actually, what we suggested, we could make some editorial changes, which are alignment of words, which is in the small paragraph that is highlighted below. But I don't think that we could, as a part of that project, start looking at network firm in a more granular way and make some amendments to make it more consistent with ISQM1. So for that part, we are, I would say, sending back to the board and the planning committee for their determination about, you know, whether they want to, you want to start a project to look at that more precisely. So I think with that, I am presenting most of the changes that we are doing on engagement team. Let me move on. I think next slide is about views, reactions. So I suggest, Carla, if we can go back, for instance, one slide or two. Yeah, another one. Yeah, for instance. So it will be on screen for our comments and feedback. So I will stop here and ask the board to provide some feedback.
Thank you, Sylvie. Any remarks, feedback, comments, please, from board members?
I see Song Nam.
No. Yes.
Yes, Sylvie, thank you for your presentation. I have actually one question. I would like to ask if the task force has considered adding a definition of audit team somewhere in these paragraphs. I'm asking you because the heading, current heading, engagement team and audit team indicates will be definitions of engagement team and also audit team. And the secondary, while reading paragraph 400C, I think the distinction between audit team and engagement team could be better described with the definition of audit team as a separate paragraph, and also later in paragraph 405 3A2, there is a definition of group audit team, but we are missing here the definition of audit team. So I would like to ask how the task force tried to structure these paragraphs. Thank you.
I will take another comment and I will respond then.
Okay. Junpei.
Yes. Thank you, Sylvia, for your presentation. I could have missed discussion points, or we will discuss this later, but I have a comment about independence requirement of service provider other than non-network firm, which is a human resource outsourcing company that the auditing firm utilizes in the busy season. I have been working for standard setting team for ISKM1, and I have received questions from several stakeholders. The question is, what level of independence would be required to service provider other than non-network firm? Please note the question is expected to cover individual and per entity. My understanding is that considering ISKM1, independence requirement for service provider other than non-network firm varies depending on it is providing services or resources and other things, not defined uniformly. I believe it might be helpful for stakeholders that code indicate how to consider and deal with the level of independence required for service providers other than non-network firm in authoritative materials. Thank you.
I will probably take those 2 points and then move on to some other comments.
Yeah.
Sagnam, on auditing and engagement team, those are defined terms. We have been defining engagement team and audit teams as 2 different groups of individuals. I would say almost as long as the code has been used. Actually, the purpose of that project for us was to realign the definition of engagement team, which includes component auditors. I mean, we could be, which is including now some individuals that could be outside the firm or the network firm. I would say that this is really the core of the change. And we are adopting entirely the same definition as what we have in ISA 220 in the code. And the paragraph that we are here are providing some additional application material about what are the consequences and how to, I would say, apply that revised definition. So when we have a title saying engagement team and audit team, keep in mind that those terms are defined. And actually, when we are using the E-code, when people will be using the E-code, when they will be hovering over engagement team and audit team, they would see the definition, the exact definition coming, and they will know what they represent and which category of individuals are included. Again, engagement team, it's not a definition anymore that we own. It is the definition for ISA 220. The definition of audit team and the term is set, and we discussed last board meeting and some prior that we are not changing an existing well-known terminology that we are using, because the entire code is based on clarifying what are independence requirements for the audit team, which includes a number of individuals. So we are not changing those terms. We are changing the contents of the terms, the group of individuals that are comprised in those terms. Group audit team, we will go back on that definition later when we will be talking about group audits. We are still working on some alignments in the context of group audit between IESBA and our own code. So if you don't mind, I will come back to that definition later on, and actually we have a slide about that. Junpei, on service provider, I understand your point. And I think that your interpretation when you say independence for a service provider varies on the role of the service provider, it's the view of the task force. I do have a slide later about what we are doing for service providers. But I have to say that we were expecting more the guidance from the IESBA, in particular from the ISA 600 task force, and that perhaps they will develop more paragraph, more material that will be helpful for us to leverage. And they decided not to. So we have the definition of service provider and as it is today. So we need to use that definition. So in a little b, a firm that is not a service firm or another service provider, the definition of service provider is coming from the IESBA materials. We are not redefining it. We could, if it is helpful, lift their definition and put it in our code. It would be up to the board perhaps to give us direction about that. But at that point, it would be extremely difficult for us to develop or interpret more or beyond what is in IWSB, either QM or ISAS. But I will come back on service provider later, because there are a few service providers for which we are providing some independence clarification in the context of group audits. Let's move on, perhaps take some other comments. I do have a comment from Michael that I can also mention at the end.
I see Lisbeth.
Thank you. I'm actually confused now, to be very honest. So now made a very valid point. It's a little bit confusing that we now have part of the definition of engagement team as it would go into the glossary, because that's where it belongs here in an actual provision. So why are we doing that? Is that just to have an example added onto it to show that it's broader than just engagement team as we used to understand it? Or is this going as such into the glossary? But I didn't think that was the case based on the previous discussion. So I'm a little bit puzzled now as well as to what it is trying to do here and why we suddenly need to define engagement team for an audit specifically in the provisions instead of going the same route as before where it was a defined term. And then secondly, on the additions on the next slide, that depending on the nature of the consultation, that addition is making it more unclear than it was ever before, because, well, depending on the nature of the consultation, practitioners will ask, well, when is it in, when is it out? It's not clear language, basically.
Okay. But let me go back to the slide above. On A, yes, we need to repeat to be able to bring the example. I would say that it's not the first time that we have a term that is defined, and that is starting, I would say, the application material, and then we go giving more example. That's, for instance, the situation exactly what we have for a network firm. Network firm is a defined term. We have a section that provides more clarification about what we mean by network firm, giving some scenarios, and it starts with repeating the definition that is in the glossary, and then it gives some additional color. So that's the approach that we have here. We thought that from a reading perspective, if you read the text, if you say I am not repeating the definition, it makes the reading extremely difficult. Something that we have on the network firm provision, for instance. So it's really the need for us to unfortunately repeat the definition as an introduction, so we know what we're talking about. So that was the approach of the task force that actually was presented last June. I take your point on the second bullet point. Actually, we may not be precise enough. Can we move to the next slide, please?
Can you tell us about Mike's comment?
Yes, I'm just finishing to respond to Lisbeth.
I beg your pardon.
Sorry. Depending on the nature of the consultation, I understand what you mean. Let me take that back to the task force, see whether we want to add another paragraph to give an example, or if we think that it's probably something that could go to an FAQ. But I take your point, Lisbeth. The paragraph on 400C, I mean, the comment from Mike, he had a comment on the paragraph 400C, and he wanted to know whether those individuals could also be from component auditor firms or not. So actually here we are in the generic paragraph. We are not talking about group audit. The component auditor discussion is more in group audit in our mind. And when we are also, we will go back to that revised definition that we call group audit team. So we have it there. So for us, it's even if we mention component auditor as an example of service provider above, we thought that it was premature to develop scenarios in the context of group audit in section 400. So that was the comment from Mike.
Okay.
Do we have any other comments?
I don't see any other. Cam, do you?
No other raised hands.
So please proceed.
Okay. So let's move on. So let's talk about group audits now, which was really where we have the task force has spent most of the time, particularly working very closely with the ISA 600 task force. As you may know, ISA 600 is expected to be approved in December, when we will be approving our exposure draft that is leveraging the content of ISA 600. So to be able to develop all the parts that we have on group audit, of course, we needed a very close coordination with ISA 600, and we really work alongside very closely. We have had teleconference, email exchange that were both at task force and staff level. The staff, they catch up regularly because they compare as their boss drafts are evolving, and because we are using each other's, I would say, content to help each other, and there are some areas when there is a clear almost overlap or joint approach. So the staff kept extremely close. And we also had both full task force teleconference at some point, which was very helpful because, you know, all the task force members being able to ask questions to the other task force. And also we had teleconference that were more staff and chair and vice chair of task force to go more granular, with a more granular way on some of the detail of the drafting and re-explain. So what were the matters discussed? We spent a lot of time on the terminology, and of course, the definition of engagement team from ISA 220, but how those definitions are really then reflected in the context of a group audit. And the use of group engagement team and group auditor, and where we identified that we were using those terms, but not necessarily to mean exactly the same thing. So we came to some suggestion that I will present to you about how we can address those terminology issues. Also, we asked, we got a lot of information about the defined term from ISA 600 that we are using in our group audit provision as well, to make sure that we have a good understanding and we use them in the right way. We discuss matters about the area of focus. You know, ISA 600, they had a lot of comments on various provisions that were coming from their comment process, and they were taking those points one after another. So we organized the work of the task force also based on when and how we would receive the feedback from ISA 600. So that was pretty important. We spent some time on breaches because ISA 600 does refer to breaches, independence breaches happening at components level. So in a way that we were using their feedback in our own draft provisions, we also provided some drafting suggestions to the ISA 600 task force so they could modify some of their own provision to have a better alignment. And as I said, they expect to approve a final ISA 600 in December. So let's move on to what we will be discussing. So we do have our new section 4.4. We used to call it a straw man until recently, and now we are really moving to an exposure draft. The structure of that new section is the same as we discussed earlier. So we are, and the content. So it's really a dedicated section where we will find everything related to independence requirements in the context of a group audit, and more specifically, independence requirement for component auditors that are outside the network. So really non-independent component auditors, because we know we have a gap in the current code, and those component auditor independent requirements were not clearly set. So now we are really clearly setting the standards here. We will also clarify some application material for the team members. So this is where we are jumping from definition of audit team and engagement team in the context, I would say, of like a statutory audit or a standalone audit as it is today in the code, to what happens when we are working in a context of a group audit. The breach provisions also for the component auditor, and the communication with those charged with governance. So we will go over those points. Let's move on. So we presented also to the CAG last week, actually, what we were doing. We spent most of the time discussing group audits. And we obtained some general support really for all the coordination work, the alignments, and all the work that we have done with ISA 600. And I would say general support for everything we presented to the CAG. They highlighted a few points. I will just give you a quick overview here, but I will come back when we will be discussing some of the paragraph later on. So they were looking at some new definition that we are proposing to add to the code, particularly the definition of the term group auditor, component. Also, they had some comments about how component auditors are selected. I have to say that in this part from the CAG, we had a number of comments that were more directed, I would say, to ISA 600 task force rather than to our IESBA task force. The good thing is that we had Lenjui and Josephine, who are chair and members of the ISA 600. They were also present during our CAG meeting, and they were also able to provide some response to the CAG members. On group audit independence, we had some points raised about whether we had restriction for component auditor on business relationship and employment. They made a comment on the new paragraph that I will present to you on non-assurance services prohibitions. And they ask also clarification on another paragraph, which are the long association requirements that would apply to key audit partners from component auditors. So they were interested in the new paragraph that we are presenting. And they also had some comments on breaches both whether on breaches it should go beyond independence, and also highlighting the importance of the communication with those charged with governance. So I would say that the comments we received were not surprising from the CAG, and some in particular on the NAS provision were extremely helpful for the task force. And actually, we will probably make some changes, and I will come back to that when we go to that paragraph. Let's move on to the next. So the first part that I would like to present to you on the changes in that updated Stroman. You remember there are really three parts in that Stroman. The first part are a glossary or a definition that are really intended to only apply to those group audit definitions. And I will have some question about location of that glossary at some point. In that glossary, we are mostly lifting a number of terms that are coming from ISA 600. So here, everything that is gray actually in your slide deck are definitions that are not done by our task force or IESBA. They are used in ISA 600, and we are just totally copying paste, I would say, what we are given by ISA 600. Those terms are used mostly only in that section 4.5, since this is the section for group audit. So I'm presenting for you here those definitions that we need. We are also creating some definition based on those. So let me move on to the next slide. So we're feeling the need, of course, to based on, we do have definition coming from ISA 600. We do have existing definition in the code, for instance, engagement team or audit team or audit client. So we need to create an equivalent in the context of a group audit. And this is where we are coming with some new definitions. If you remember those definitions we presented to you in the former version in the last meeting, we received a number of feedback from you, and we are making some changes. So the terms that we need are group auditor firm. So because we need to clarify in 4.5, if you remember, independence requirements that are applicable to individuals. So for individuals, we use usually the term group auditor or auditor, and firms. So when we are talking about firms, we are adding firms like group auditor firm or component auditor firm to make sure that we're talking about the entity and not some individuals. And this is defined. Similarly, we needed to define the equivalent of audit client in the code. We say that a firm shall be independent of an audit client, and we now have to transpose that in the context of a group audit. So we are defining group audit client. And we are defining also component audit client. That one, I would say, was really the result of the key changes in ISA 600. You know that our code is based on the one definition of audit client, which includes the entity under audits plus the related entities. And when we were talking about a component, we needed to clarify what are the entities for which independence is required. And one of the big challenge that we had for that task force is that a component is not necessarily based on legal structure. It could be an entity, but it could be something else than an entity, like a business unit, a function, or activity. So the task force tried continuing to be, I would say, consistent with what we have in ISA 600 to clarify the entities that would be attached to a component. So that way, when we say you have to be independent of the component, we will know exactly to which entities it would apply. So those are new definitions that we do need for the purpose of our new 405 paragraph. There are another definition. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay. So component auditor firm, I mentioned. So again, we are adding the same way we have earlier in the slide, group auditor firm, we have also component auditor firm. So clearly we're not talking about individuals here and firm. And we created a mirror in the context of a group audit of our definition of audit team, which is really the core definition to identify the individuals that are subject to independence. So far, and it is presented to you and it is in the material, we used the term group audit team. I think, I mean, the task force actually, after talking again with ISA 600 last week, actually, and also the comment from the CAG, and I think the comment that I just had earlier today, we will probably change that term and not use the term group audit team, because from various feedback, it seems that it is confusing. And it seems ISA 600 is using also the term group audit team with a different meaning. So we have highlighted it in yellow here, and we will probably, the same way you see in A, we say the engagement team for the group audit. We will probably talk about the audit team for the group audit later on in our paragraph. So the audit team for the group audit, that will be the new terminology. What it includes is still what you can see here, and entirely mirroring the definition of audit team in the as proposed, consistent with the extant code and the adjustments that we need because of the engagement team project with ISA 220. So those are all those definitions, with the difference that I am just adding in for you for the what is in yellow. So I will ask you, of course, I will pause and ask some questions. And there is one, I would say, almost additional question. It was pending last time. We have not totally decided whether we keep that as a subsection in the introduction of 405, or if we need to take all those terms and bring them to the glossary. For us, it could be we can do both. I mean, could go both ways. We heard some people were saying, well, it's convenient to have one single section talking about group audits, everything at the same place. And so we have the definition in the beginning, and then, you know, those terms that are used later on in the provision, they are just close by and easy to refer to. There is also the point that actually most of those definitions are only applicable to that section and not to the entire code. So I would say that that's a pro to keep all those definitions here in 405. And then there is the other possibility to say, well, you know, those are defined terms. We have a glossary. Why don't we use the glossary to have all the defined terms? So we will just follow the direction, I would say, of the board about the location of those definitions. So here I will pause to take comments, both, of course, on the definition themselves, our proposal to modify the term in yellow here, and the location of those definitions.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sylvie. Would like to invite comments, questions, please. I see one from Galen. Galen?
Galen, I think you're on mute.
No, he's not.
Oh, you're not on mute. Can't hear you.
I can't hear you, Galen. Is there anyone else while Galen fixes this?
Would you be able to hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Sylvia, thank you. I'm looking on slide 13 in the additional language at the bottom there that is added beginning with depending. And in that connection, a component auditor, the last part of that, might perform an audit of the financial statements. I wonder if that might be able to be simplified. A component auditor, well, they're going to perform some audit procedures. I don't know if they'll perform an audit, but they might not perform an audit of financial statements. Maybe it's just of financial information, or I wonder if it might just be simplified a little bit, say a component auditor performs audit procedures on financial information. It seems like it would cover everything.
Thank you, Galen. Can I take Lisbeth also?
And I'm not hearing now.
Lisbeth?
Yeah, so on that same point, an audit of financial information, I know it's what the IESBA 600 uses as a term, but we only have it in the glossary as historical financial information. So the question is, are we talking about the same? I guess so. Should it be consistent? Should the glossary perhaps be adjusted? So that's just a question to the task force. And then secondly, I am absolutely not in favor of having this entire list of definitions within the code because this is setting a precedent for any other new sections that may come. So this can go into the glossary. You need to read the code together with the glossary.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Can I ask something before we move on to another one? I would say that yeah, that's true that that paragraph in red at the end, it's wording really lifted from ISA 600. The issue for us, let's say if I summarize, we're trying to express here that the component auditor, they could do really a full scope audit. And they could just do a very limited scope audit. They could be only do, just one inventory or just audit one line item, etc. So it's really the intent to say that a component auditor, I mean, they don't even necessarily express an audit opinion. They just do some audit work on something specific based on the work requested by the group. And this is that clarification that we are trying to bring here, full scope versus limited scope audit. And that could have some impact, for instance, where we will be talking about on assurance services when we're talking about the situation of self-reviews, right? So that's why the task force thought that it was helpful to clarify the potential range of audit work that a component auditor could be doing. Also to clarify that even if a component auditor is doing only a very limited scope, they are still subject to independence requirement and have to be independent of the component audit client. So that's really, I would say, the purpose of that clarification. The question I wanted to add to this, but I understand that you would like to see the definition in the glossary, but do you expect to see all those definitions in the glossary? Because as I said, the one about there are not IESBA definition. There are just ISA 600 definition. The one in the that were in the gray boxes. So for you, it means everything should go in the glossary. Okay. May I have some views also? I mean, clearly for us, it's a very easy thing. You know, we put everything in the glossary. I mean, the task force has no special view. It's just a location issue. I see, Ken, you raise your hand.
Yes, Sylvia, and I think you know, this discussion probably signals all the more reason for users to use the E-code. Because with the E-code, essentially this question is moot, because all the defined terms would be underlined, and all a user would need to do would simply be to hover his or her mouse pointer over the defined term, and the definition would pop up. So it is a moot point, as I say, and maybe the cleanest way is to move all the definitions to the glossary, as IESBA has advocated, and in fact would be more consistent with the way we've restructured the code.
As I said, the task force has no particular, you know, we can work with, but perhaps easier way with anyone who is opposed or as an issue, you know, if we move it to the glossary, because if everybody is okay, then we move on. Oh, Stavros, you're on mute.
Opposed, please. If anyone is opposed, please raise a hand, but explain your opposition as well. Do you see anything, Cam?
No hands raised, Mr. Chairman.
There you are, Sylvie.
Okay, very simple. Next time it will be all in the glossary. Beside that, I will take any other comments, except for the location, you know, on everything else, and particularly the paragraph that we are presenting to you.
Yeah. Any other comments, please?
Yeah.
There's Galen.
If I might come back, Sylvia, and I was losing some of my sound. I'm sorry, but so I didn't hear your response. But I heard part of it, and on that paragraph we were talking about, it seems to me like you want to put the minimum threshold that scopes in a component auditor. If I'm reading this and I'm, you know, I could come and say, well, I really didn't perform an audit of the financial statements. I just did a procedure. So that doesn't bring me back in to be subject to independence. So I understand where the task force is coming from. What your explanation of full scope audit versus, you know, partial. I would make it as simple as possible to make sure that people know that they're scoped in. And that means that if they perform any audit procedures whatsoever, they're in the basket.
Okay, actually the purpose is exactly the opposite, is to make sure that those who are doing the limited scope are included. So let us work again, perhaps on the wording to make it clear. Or perhaps because since we are in the definition, we don't put application material and we don't put requirements. So the task force will look at it and see whether we need to add something to clarify in the text, not in the definition, that if a component auditor does a limited scope, they are still subject to independence. Because that's really the purpose here. Make it broader, not more limited.
Right.
Yes, Ken?
Ken.
Yes, I would just really take us back to the definitions of a component auditor and a component auditor firm, because both definitions refer to the performance of audit procedures. So that is the threshold already. And I don't think we need to redefine the threshold or reintroduce it, if you will, indirectly through this additional explanatory material. It is in the definition already.
Okay, I think we take the point. We can go back and discuss with the task force, whether we think it could be further clarified, or we if it is sufficiently clear as that. I had a comment from Mike Ashley actually on that one, particularly the definition of a component audit client. Mike raised the point that he is confused when the component is a business unit to which entity it applies. I think it's something that we might also consider when we have the explanatory memorandum, who will be, since we are talking about an exposure draft, and we might want to ask a question here, whether for the readers, the situation is clear for the second bullet point, when a component is a business unit function of activity. So I suggest we could also address it that way.
Okay. Any other? I don't see any, Sylvie, and it is time to take a break, if you don't mind. So I would like to break for 15 minutes, please. So we come back 45 minutes after the hour. Right?
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello again.
Hello. 1 minute.
I see lots of smiling faces, or almost smiling faces coming on.
That's great.
I just had to get rid of my cat. Otherwise, you would be.
Okay. I wanted to ask, is Andrew Pinkney with us? Because I couldn't see him.
I am. I'm
hello.
here.
I don't see you. Hello, it's good to see you.
And you? No, I've been here.
Okay. Great. So Sylvie, I think we are ready to start again.
Okay, let's put the slides on. Okay, so now we are moving to the definition to really what is in the section 405. So you remember for section 405 is gathering everything that relates to independence in one single section for group audits. And before we talk about component auditors, it will really list the number of requirements and expectations that are also applicable to individuals and audit for the main firm and the group auditor and the network firms. So you remember the recommendation that we had in earlier calls, meetings, was to keep it very simple and have cross-reference to the extant code. So most of the requirements here are about using the terminology applicable to group audits in the paragraph and pointing to the relevant section of the code. So it clearly says that if you are in a group audit and you are in the engagement team or in the audit team, you independence applies in full as per the code already. Same thing from the firm that is doing the group audit, and something from the network firms of that firm doing the group audit. So it's just clarification and consistency in each of the paragraph. That was one of the comment from the board last time. So those are all the requirements. We can move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. So this slide here is just a reminder for you. You remember we had agreed even more a year ago on the principles that we would apply in the context of a group audit when we determine which framework we would be applying for a group audit. And you remember, and it has been discussed extensively. So as I said, it's just a reminder, not to reopen. That our principle is that the status of the group governs the independence framework that will be applicable. So if the group itself is not a public interest entity, we apply non-public interest entity independence framework. If the group itself is a public interest entity, we apply the public interest entity framework to all the components. We presented that to you. We had your approval. We presented that to the CAG actually twice. And we presented that also in our outreach sessions with IESBA, IFER, Forum of Firm, and we got some support on that. So those are the principles. So let's move on to the next slide. We put those principles to the text. So the text actually that we have is reflecting those principles. And we are also mirroring here some of the input that we received, feedback that we received from our call last June. So we had comments about some consistency with the rest of the code, like all group audit clients and public interest entity audit clients. We discussed the fact that what would apply really to component auditor firms. Here we are really in component auditors outside the firm network, so it's being about more to the point and more aligned with the word, and also having a better use of the definitions that we discussed earlier. And we made also some changes in our application material. You remember that we were asked, and we presented it to some extent, the situation where a component auditor is doing both the work as component auditor, but he happens also to be the statutory auditor of the components, and to put as a reminder that the component auditor may have two independence framework to apply or layer or apply in parallel. So it's more like a reminder. And we received your feedback. So this is why we are putting more application material about a more straightforward example when a component auditor firm also perform a statutory audit of a component that is a public interest entity. So it's a situation where, as component auditor, they may only have to apply the framework for non-PIs if the group is a non-PI, but they have, it's more like a reminder that if that component on its own is a public interest entity, they also have to apply the public interest entity framework for their statutory audit. So not to forget that there could be layers of requirements. Let's move on to the next slide. Clearly, we discuss first, following the usual structure, the requirements that are applicable to all group audit clients. And we are also looking at the obligation that are, I would say, more the result of the conceptual framework. So there are, in our code, we do have some requirements, and we do have also some expectation to have certain considerations to go beyond the code, depending on facts and circumstances. And similarly, for component auditor, we are introducing similar paragraphs. So, for instance, that a component auditor would have to go beyond the entity, or beyond exactly what is, I would say, rule-based, to apply the framework, which is principle-based, and in particular to, based on facts and circumstances, look at the broader picture. And similarly, same as what we have in the code, we have a requirement that when there is some knowledge or reason to believe that certain interests or relationships are also creating a threat to independence, there is a need to evaluate and address those threats. So here, those paragraphs are continuing to mirror what we have in the code. And I would say they are really the application of the conceptual framework by a component auditor outside the network when they are looking at independence in general with respect to the component. Let's move on to the next paragraph. So we are also adding some new content to that section that was not presented to you when we discussed the Strawman last time, but that we told you that we will be looking at. So in particular, we worked on adding some a paragraph on non-assurance services. That paragraph that you have in front of you, we received already some feedback from the CAG, and I think from Michael as well. So I will just present you the paragraph as it is and what we are considering doing. So on non-assurance services, and to reconnect with what we were discussing earlier when we were saying that a component auditor, they could do a full scope audit or a limited scope audit, and also that they are looking at really the related entities of the components. When we are talking about non-assurance services and the new provisions that would prohibit any situation or any service that create a self-review threat for in the PI context, or that would require looking at threats and safeguard related to self-review in the non-PI context. We thought that it was helpful to add something in section 404 to clarify the situation of self-review when you are a component auditor doing only an audit of a component, could be full scope, could be limited scope, and what exactly constitutes self-review. So we wanted to give an example here, and the comment that we received is that that paragraph is perhaps a bit too short, that only the people really who know really the context would have the ability to apply. So that there was support about having that addition, but perhaps we need to elaborate a little bit more on the context on non-assurance services applicable to component auditors. So we are taking already that that comment. We will certainly rework that. But when we will be discussing, the expectation for you is whether in the feedback that I expect from you is really if you agree that it is really something that we need to address, and any suggestion that you may have. So we will go back to that, I assume, during the discussion. If we move to the next slide. This is the requirement for public interest entities. So similarly, we are just re-clarifying where we are in the principle. So when the group is a public interest entity, apply the framework. And then there is the application material that next slide is also relevant, which is the situation of long association, which applies only in the PI situation. So you remember we discussed that, but we had no paragraph being presented to you, no draft at the time, but it was a placeholder. We discussed that there will be situation where a component auditor firm will have, when the audit partner of a component auditor firm could be a key audit partner. And if we are in the context of a public interest entity, the expectation would be for that key audit partner to follow the partner rotation rules and cooling off. So this is what we are introducing here, adding to re-clarify that even if a component auditor is outside the network, if the engagement partner is considered a key audit partner, there will be an expectation to rotate. So this is the paragraph that we are proposing. And in conjunction with that paragraph, we are also proposing a consequential amendment to the definition of key audit partner to capture the situation of component auditors as well in the context of a group audit. So it's a pretty important paragraph because it really creates a new requirement for a competent auditor in relation to rotation as well. If you remember, the view at the time is that if that component is audited by a network firm, the key audit partner would be subject to rotation for exactly the same component, the same work. So the view here is that if the component is audited by a component firm outside the network, well, at least the same requirement should apply and the key audit partner should be rotating. Let's move on to the next slide as well. Another addition to the strawman, and it is something that was suggested to us by the Forum of Firm, and that we discussed also with the ISA 600 task force before adding it. The comment that we found had a lot of merit is that when there is a group audit, and in particular in the beginning, when there is the planning of the audit of who does what, who are the component auditor, that could really change over the year. Because we're talking about a full year for the audit engagement period. And there could be some changes in the structure of the client. There could be some merger and acquisition. There could be some changes in the evaluation of the risk and on the determination of components. So there could be situations where actually there would be some new component auditors that would be expected to join the group audit. And that could be already, in the middle of the year. With the risk of having some, I would say, non-compliance or non-independent situation in the prior months before that component auditor is being asked to perform the audit procedure or join. So similarly, we thought that it was helpful to acknowledge that situation in the code. And we are, I would say, applying here the similar principles that we have in the extant code when we're talking about mergers and acquisitions. So when when we have situation when we are the statutory auditor, and the client, for instance, is acquiring or merging with another entity, there could be some situation where there are some independence issue created by the new scope, and the code provides for some processes to address that. So similarly here, we are considering that when there are some changes in component auditor firms, it could happen at any time, and it is helpful for the code to provide for some transition provisions and considerations. So it's really new, and it is also an area where I would really welcome your feedback. So I will move on, I think, to open for discussion. So, and in particular, the 3 additions that we are adding to section 4.4. I think next slide is about questions. Oh, no, sorry, I forgot. Service providers. Let me talk about that part. We put a slide on service providers, but actually the issue is that we are not presenting any drafts. So it's a slide that shows more like a deletion rather than an addition. And I think it's important to highlight as well. So we had some feedback from the board meeting about service provider service delivery centers. And we were asked also to discuss with ISA 600. We were expecting with the ISA 600 task force possibly to have some additional clarification about use of service provider for group audits. And we were expecting that perhaps, they would be giving us more application material. The term service provider in ISQCM is extremely broad. And Junpei actually mentioned that earlier in his comments. It could be the provision of outsourcing, people, but it could be also the provision of software. The way it is very, very broad, you could even read it sometime, like a catering company providing food to the audit team could even almost be seen as a service provider. So for us, it was extremely difficult to try to include all types of service provider without having more, I would say, fine-tuned definition in our paragraph. And the risk that we had was to have the code to go beyond actually what is in ISQM or in ISA 600 and creating some interpretation. So the task force thought that it was better for us just to, I would say, almost say silence on those issues. But I will say that actually we are addressing very directly the 2 types of service providers that we need for the purpose of independence. The first type are the individuals that are participating to the audit, because whether they are from the firm, a network firm, a component auditor, or any other service provider, to the extent that those individuals are doing audit procedures, they are captured by our definition of engagement team. So that's one thing. So we are sure that they are not left aside. And the other type of service provider that is captured in the context of a group audit are the component auditors. You remember in the definition, we have added, and we discussed that earlier, that we are putting as an example in our the beginning of the section that component auditors are indeed service providers, and this is confirmed by ISA 600, of course. So for us, we believe that our proposal already captures the two types of service providers that need to be subject to independence requirement. However, the task force doesn't consider that we need to address other types of service providers, because first, it is outside our scope, and second, it would be creating a risk for us to interpret what is in ISQM or ISA 600. So this is why we decided to be silent on that one. And of course, I will take some comments on that one. The other points that the task force could always, at some point, I mean, clearly there will be something in the explanatory memorandum, but we still have the possibility to look at non-application material later on those matters, and perhaps do something jointly with the IWSB. So now I think this is that was the last one. So let me go back. Can we scroll up back to other even, and perhaps I will raise open for the board on particularly the 3 additions: non-assurance services, long association, transition, and also the discussion on service providers, please.
Thank you, Sylvie. Floor is open for the board. Please show your hand if you have a comment, question. Cam, did you see any?
No hands yet, Mr. Chairman.
Let's wait a moment because some questions may be brewing.
Song Nam?
Oh, yes. Can you move back to the very beginning? Paragraph 405.6. Yes, here I have a question about the expression. It says a network form of the group auditor firm. I understand what it is, but I believe in this case, a better expression could be a component auditor from within the group auditor firm's network. I'm asking you because it's in the next section, in the next paragraph, we have used component auditor firms outside the group auditor network firms, and also at in paragraph 45.14A2, we have used the expression that a component auditor firms outside the group auditor network firms, outside the group auditor firms network. So I believe in paragraph 45.6 there could be a change to better express what it is.
Perhaps I could answer now, because actually that requirement applies to all network firms, whether they are component auditors or not. Because it really mirrors the code. The code, when you have a statutory audit, for instance, the firm has to be independent, and all the network firms of that firm have to be independent, even if they do not participate to the audit at all. That's the network, the entire network has to be independent, regardless of participation to the audit. And here, what we are saying is that it's almost regardless of the participation to the group audits, a network firm has to be independent. We could even, I mean, if there is ambiguity, we might be able to add something to clarify that it doesn't matter whether they do audit or not audit.
Yeah, I now I can better understand when you said.
Yes.
Yeah, when you said, I understand when you said, and then question could be all network forms of the group auditor firm would be better, I believe, rather than a network form of the group auditor firm. I understand. Yeah, what you say. Please, yeah, take a look at.
Thank you.
Well, this is a matter of phrasing, actually.
Yes.
I think we're agreed on the meaning, on
Yes.
the substance. Okay. Any other? Lisbeth?
Yeah, thank you. I do have a significant number of comments, but I put them in writing and I sent them in advance to your task force, Sylvie. So I'm not going to go into each of the details here in the interest of time. Nevertheless, there are a couple of matters where I'm thinking it's not the right approach. So, for instance, if you go to let's move on, not this slide, but moving further down. No, not this one. Yeah, for instance, this one is a good example. You are referring on regular basis to paragraphs in the traditional approach, if I can call it so, where the audit client is standalone and it's just a firm and the network firm that is doing the audit. But if you apply that to different situations, so where the audit client is not really equal to the component audit client definition, or you are dealing with firms that are outside the network, one could, if you really read it carefully, one could argue that these references actually don't apply to that particular situation because, for instance, the R400.20 talks about an audit client, doesn't talk about a component audit client, or it talks about firm or network firm, but it doesn't talk about the component audit client. So I'm a little bit afraid that by having these references to mimic what is in there is not the right approach. I think you will have to be more specific in this section 4 or 5 to make it really work. And read my comments because I gave a couple of examples in what I submitted to you, but I think this task force needs to give it a little bit more attention. The same applies, for instance, to that R458A2. Similar situation, one could argue this doesn't apply, and on the other hand, you're doing it right in R4.5.9. With regards to the references on, well, the standalone example, and then the pi and the non-pi that flows out of it, although I don't really see the link with that first sentence. Also the reference to non-assurance services. I personally am not a big fan to have it here. I think this is stuff that should go either in an FAQ or in the basis for conclusions. I think it's a little bit, well, misplaced, if I can say it that way. Also, that example on non-assurance services, I think, isn't 100% technically correct. I don't have an issue with your extension on the key audit partner definition. However, the wording, again, isn't 100% right. I don't think a partner is responsible for a component. I think a partner is responsible for the audit of the financial statements or the financial information of a component. So there is still a little bit of important drafting that needs to happen there. But that's my overall reflection on this. I am concerned every time you basically send a reference back to the traditional approach in the code with regards to independence. And that also comes back in what I guess you're going to be dealing with next in the breaches section. There it's even more clear, I think.
I think we will look at your comments. I understand your point, Lisbeth. So perhaps it's a question of the way we draft it, and we will look again at the draft. But I think on the principle, the view was not to rewrite the entire code or rewrite every paragraph, I would say, in the code and translate it to component editor. So we will look again at the wording, but I think that also based on some other feedback, we will try to cross-reference as much as possible, perhaps in a better way if we could, rather than rewriting almost anything, because you could almost, I mean, the easy way would be to totally rewrite the entire code from the perspective of group audit and component auditor, but I don't think it was really it would be really the best approach here, and I think we don't really have support for that. But I take your point about making the drafting more tight, I would say, for that. Can I see if there is any other comment?
Is there anyone? I don't see any, but Cam maybe does.
No hands. Don't see any other.
Okay. So I would suggest we move on to the next section, which is breaches. Okay. So that slide again is the reminder of the principle that we have been applying to the breach section. You remember we had some flowcharts at some point before even drafting the strawman, where we were presented to you what is our proposed approach and process when a component auditor identifies a breach. We got some feedback from you. We came with some draft. Actually, we presented that to the CAG, to EFR, to IESBA, to the forum of firm. And in general, we have obtained support on the process. So let's move on to the next slide, which is the text itself. We had a lot of exchanges on that part with the ISA 600 task force. And actually, we were almost doing some drafting in parallel because in the ISA 600, there are some paragraphs that are referring to independence breaches or breaches of applicable ethical requirements. And it is in ISA 600, but it also it is also present in ISA 220 that is already approved. So we really need to, there is a, I would say, a cross-reference going both ways on those parts. So the first type of changes that we made were more in the background and introduction, because we showed that text to ISA 600 and the context is referring to ISA 600. So the changes that we are here, the first one is if we talk about ISA 600, we have to be comfortable that the ISA 600 task force likes the way we present their standard. So those are some of the changes that we have here. And as their draft is evolving, we also make sure that our own draft is following and continuing to be consistent. So this is one of the key change. Let's move on to the next slide. Similarly, in the way we were expressing the relationship between the auditor at group level, the audit firm at group level, and the component auditor, we had to ensure that we are using the same terminology. So the process that we have here is the one that was in the flowchart and that we agreed. We are just making some of the some changes editorial, but that are showing the full alignment between the work of the two task forces. Let's move on. Those other changes in the process are coming from the discussion in June. So we were fine-tuning with you the process. So you remember, component auditor identifies a breach. They need to, of course, stop the what is problematic, start to apply, address the issue. They have an obligation to communicate with the group auditors firm. And there were some suggestions from a board member to not only review and evaluate the impact of the breach, but also close the matter and determine the need for action. So we added that. The other part was about also, once there is a breach, even if there is a need for action, what should be the outcome? Is it possible to continue to use the work of the component auditor if you are the group auditor? Or is there the possibility to use to apply some safeguard or have some actions? So we got the wording a bit more tighter based on your feedback. Also, similarly, some instead of rely, we are using, which is editorial from ISA 600. And if we move on, similarly, from ISA 600, they looked at what we were saying here. Particularly, you remember we had the two scenarios where the group auditor could continue to use the component auditors framework, or when the situation is more severe, when they have to address it, or even stop using the work of the component auditor. And it is something that it is very important for us to have a full agreement with the ISA 600, because in their standard, they determine how to qualify a component auditor and which situation they can use the work or not use that work. So all that is the result of the coordination. I will move on to the last one as well. Communication with those charged with governance. So you remember it was discussed with you. That's really the last steps when we are dealing with a breach. At the end, the auditor needs to go to talk to those charged with governance or obtain their concurrence, whether the breach can be addressed, how it is addressed. And in this situation, the breach is happening at the component auditors level, but nevertheless, there is a need to communicate with those charged with governance. And there could be some conclusion not to use the work performed by the component auditor. Initially, we tried to have from ISA 600 to see whether they could be helpful, in mandating that communication with those charged with governance, which would be easier for us. But they were, it was not presented in their exposure draft. It was not really discussed. So we are mostly having, I would say, the requirement in the code. And they are comfortable for us to have that requirement in the code, to have the discussion with those charged with governance, and also to have in the code those scenarios about not using the work performed by the component auditor. What they are doing, and let me move on to the next slide. Yes, they have some reference in their standard about the non-compliance of component auditors with ethical requirements, including independence. So we went back and forth with them. We provided them some suggested drafting. There will be further modifying a little bit some of their application material. So I'm not. We are not adding the final wording that they intend to have here, because it's still pretty fluid. But this is the standard, and the way the board is their board is comfortable with. It will clarify that group auditor will have to do the or obtain the audit evidence without the work of component auditor if the component auditor does not comply with the ethical requirements that are relevant to the group audit engagement, including those related to independence. And we had some discussion with the task force and their board, and actually we realized, and we made a comment that that paragraph in ISO 600 could be interpreted two ways. It could be interpreted in a way that says that if a component auditor has any breach, regardless of what they're doing, their work cannot be used. And this is not the intent, actually, of ISO 600 and IESBA. We got that clarification. So their view is that for them, compliance with ethical requirements would include compliance with the breach provision. So it means for them that, as same for us, that if there is an independence breach, for instance, that is properly addressed as expected under the provision that we will have in the code, it is satisfactory, and the group auditor will be in a position to continue to use the work of the component auditor. So we all agree on the direction and on the principle. And the ISO 600 will be working on application material, and they already have some paragraph, but application material to that paragraph to clarify that the breach provision is part in their mind of the ethical requirement, including those related to independence. So we will, our joint purpose is to have a full alignment, I would say, and coordination or clarification that an auditor can continue to use the component auditor's work if all the provision in the code are complied with, and that includes breaches, which is entirely consistent with what we're trying to obtain. So this is really what I have here for the breach part. So mostly it's most of the changes that we're making, besides some that are reflecting the feedback from June, are really ensuring that both ISO 600 and the code are fully aligned in the way we address breaches. I think next slide is questions. So let's go back perhaps to 2 slides back. That's fine. Perhaps next one. Yeah. And here I will open for comments and feedback.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvie. Floor is open for comments, remarks, questions.
Please raise your hands if any comments. Don't see any yet, but Lisbeth.
Lisbeth?
So on this A1 paragraph, Sylvie, I'm a little bit puzzled why we have it here. We shouldn't forget that the breaches section in the ISAs is based on what we are having. But so now we're copying it back in here, and then we go back to our breaches paragraph. So it's a little bit repetitive. Plus, it sounds a little contradictory because, well, first of all, it talks about a may, which should be a might, but these actions might include promptly communicating the breach to the group engagement partner, whereas a few lines further, it says you shall report it to the group audit engagement partner or the group engagement partner. So I really don't see the need of having this A1 here, to be very candid with you. I think it's unnecessary. Going then to A2. This one, I think it's a shortcut too short because it doesn't, well, when you read R400.80 till 489, and that's a little bit what I was hinting at in my previous comment, it just talks about the firm. So if you refer here, it would only refer to the group audit firm. And so what this paragraph, and it's not applicable to the component auditor firm, technically speaking, when you just apply the breaches provisions. So what it should say rather is an R paragraph where it says the component auditor firm shall communicate that it had identified a breach
We are within the network here, Elizabeth.
I know, but how can the group audit firm know that something happened? They need to communicate it to the group audit firm, and then the group audit firm can apply the paragraphs of 80 till 89, because those are written from the firm's perspective, not the network firm's perspective.
But I'm sorry, I really don't follow you, because if there is anything happening is a network firm, whether they are a component or not, they have to apply the bridge provision. We are just giving a reminder here.
So are you saying that in a group audit context, I'm not saying in a standalone audit, in a group audit context, if you have an identified breach at the component, that you need to go to those charged with governance at the component audit level? Or isn't it at the group audit level that you need to go to those charged with governance?
Actually, I think we can look at that, but clearly we are here just in a network firm. Something happening in a network firm, they go to.
I know, but who has to take action is my point. It's not the component firm, it's the group audit firm. So I left my comments in writing to you, but this doesn't work the way it's written here.
Can we stop the dialogue, please? Lisbeth, make your point and go on.
I made my point, Stavros.
Thank you. Sylvie, back to you.
Okay, we'll take any other comment that we have. I know that Lisbeth will send in writing some suggestions.
Okay. Any other comments, please?
No other raised hands at the moment. Oh, Sung Nam.
Sung Nam.
Sung Nam?
You're
on mute.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, on this paragraph 0514A2, I think this paragraph should start something like, if a component auditor firm within the network identifies a breach, then paragraphs A and B apply. So currently it's too short, and we understand what it is, the intent, but I believe it would be better to change the expression, phrasing a little bit. That's my comment. And I have one more comment on 4518A2.
Can we move to the?
Oh yeah, I'll ask you later.
Is it that one?
That's right. Yeah, on A. I think I understand what the intent is, but I have difficulties in understanding what message it tried to deliver. In normal circumstances, when the group auditor firm determines that they cannot use the component auditor firm's work, they'll perform the audit procedures on the areas impacted by the component auditor firm's breach. But what's written here is a little bit different from my understanding, and also tricky to understand. So I suggest you, task force, may be able to refine this wording and expression.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sung Nam.
Oh yeah, I have a small minor thing, but I send it by email. Is small thing, just a correction or making consistency. So I'll communicate to you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sung Nam. Any other comments or remarks, please? Well, Sylvie, I don't see any other.
Okay, so perhaps I will move on. We have taken all the points here, and we will, of course, come back with some revised wording next time. Can we move on to the last slide? So this is the timeline, but we have added the same that you have seen in the past. What is important is to look at the bottom, the coordination between the two board meetings. So actually, we have now, I would say, more the calendar for the two boards. And we know that ISA 600, they are expecting to approve ISA 600 as final on December 14. Actually, they have a first discussion, I think the week of December 8 or something. Yeah, on the December 8. And so they will be able to really get some feedback for their board with a view to approve the final on the 14th. And on our own calendar, we have the approval of the exposure draft on the 16th. So we come after we have the final pronouncement from IESBA. So we have already started to work with the ISA 600 task force to make sure that and to really monitor very closely any change that they could make, particularly if they change some definition or if they have some additional feedback. Also, the two paragraphs that we were discussing earlier on breaches, since they will be reflecting and changing some of their own application materials. So actually, we have already set a number before the board meetings of calls where we will be making sure that we really work in parallel. And we are also making sure that if there are any changes for the final pronouncements as the result of their first discussion on December 8th, here we would be also reflecting for the exposure draft that we will be presenting to you. So I think what is important that, of course, we will give you the issue papers and the draft, the exposure draft in advance as usual. But I think it's important to highlight that when we will be coming to you for that discussion and our approval, there could be some adjustments because of the changes in ISA 600 that we might bring almost at the last minute. So far, we do not expect anything that would be substantive from the discussion of their board right now. I mean, they seem to be pretty well on track. But there could be always a surprise. So of course, if we spot anything, we will try to inform you as early as possible or highlight some of the changes, even email you to get your feedback. But I just want to ensure you that it is. I mean, we know that it is tricky, that the two calendars, overlapping are something we need to manage. And that we will do, of course, our best working together to make sure that when we come with an exposure draft on December 16, we will have a document that is really fully aligned to ISA 600. The other point is, I would say that the rest, no change from before. For the effective date, since we will come with also a proposal for effective date, we are still looking at alignment with ISA 600. So same thing, we will tell you more about ISA 600 effective date after their board meeting in December, since they will be approving as well an effective date. So so far the effective date is still a question mark, and we will have more clarity at that point. On some other comments that I received in particular from Mike Ashley was if we could And we will be working, of course, on the explanatory memorandum. Yeah, he was asking for flowcharts and those kind of things. We use some flowcharts for a number of our presentations, and we are intending also, if we do explanatory memorandum, to reuse those flowcharts as well to facilitate the comment, the work of the commenter. Another point that I wanted to mention is between now and December, we will have another meeting with the Forum of Firm. You remember that I show you those paragraphs on the transition based on their comments, and we will be presenting that to them, and we expect that they will also give us some feedback on that point. So with that, I will take any question or comment or suggestion in relation to the timeline and particularly the articulation between the work of the two boards.
I see Lisbeth.
Yes, so on seeing this timeline, is there an intention to have at least a meeting in between now and December, especially after a lot of the serious concerns being raised in this discussion? I feel like I'm put under pressure to go for approval already after a first read. And then in addition to that, if there are only 2 days between the IAASB's vote and our vote, is that not a little bit too aggressive? So is there perhaps a need to have, and I really don't like having it, but perhaps a slightly delayed exposure draft, so that we are voting, I mean, so that at least we have sufficient time in the week of the IESBA meeting in December to look at the only second draft of this. So this is really a very short time frame when you compare it to what other task forces have done in the past. So I'm a little bit concerned that I might not be able to really reflect enough to be able to vote on an exposure draft given this timeline.
So are you suggesting that we do this later, that we delay this? I don't understand, because if...
Well, I think it's a combination, Stavros. I really have a lot of, and I agree, technical concerns on what is being discussed today, and it might be too technical to discuss them at this point, but I do think that what we have today requires significant rewrite in well, several of the places. So that means that between September and December 16, don't we need an additional meeting to go through that rewrite? And that puts us under a little bit less pressure for the December approval, because that's only a second read. I don't think we've ever done that before. And then depending on what happens on the 14th of December, potentially we might have to reconsider our ED on the 16th.
We were doing the second read today. I mean, not the full, because we added some paragraph, but we presented a draft in June already. This is the second one, since we are presenting something to you in track change actually based to June, and we will have a third read in December.
But it says first read, I'm sorry. And it was a straw man. So
yeah, it was a straw man, but actually there is, the straw man is not, I mean, we already went to some of the discussion, but I won't argue on that. Perhaps Stavros, what do you think about the timeline and the approval?
I think first of all, I do not think that we should discuss about delaying things now. If it arises that we have a problem in December, that is something for the board to decide at that time. We cannot preemptively think that there's going to be a delay. Second, I do appreciate that there is a risk that the approval of ISA 600 might, in fact, present us with some new material and may need more discussion. I do not know, though. I cannot predict this at all. The best remedy I can think of that is to just keep keep in communication with them, Sylvie, as I know you do anyway, so that we can have an early heads up about something that possibly will make a big change for us. And as for the rest, I think we'll judge it on the basis of what we have in December. But I do agree that this is the second read that we did today. And the third read is going to be in December.
Mr. Chairman, I see Ken has his hands raised.
Ken.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, well, first of all, on the matter of whether it's a first read or second read, I think it's besides the point. We have turnaround documents of the first read for approval for exposure in the past, so really depends on whether there are open issues for the board to consider. But I guess the more important point is about process. And Lisbeth, we understand you have some detailed comments. I would ask that you send those comments through to the task force and allow the task force to consider them. And my suggestion would be for the task force to have a focused discussion with you to discuss your points and see whether any changes that the task force might effect to the document would meet with your satisfaction. And the board can be apprised of the discussions through being fully transparent in terms of the comments you have raised, as indeed any other comments board members might raise, as we have done before. So the task force can compile any comments board members might wish to send after this board session. The task force can consider those comments. And in particular, Lisbeth, with regard to your detailed technical points, my suggestion would be for the task force to engage with you separately to work out your points and see whether we can reach a sensible position, and then report back to the board. That would be my suggestion for perhaps a more efficient process as we move into the December board discussion.
Thank you, Ken. That's a very good suggestion, and I think that's how we should proceed, because I would like to hear from the task force an evaluation also of these points that Lisbeth is going to submit, which are serious points. So I think what Ken is suggesting is the right way. Sylvie?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely agree with Ken's suggestions.
Okay. And you, Lisbeth, are you okay with this?
I am okay with this as long as there is transparency to the other board members as well. And that's why I was saying, I think we might need a meeting in between now and December. That was why I was suggesting that.
You mean a meeting of the board?
Yeah, and I've sent my comments already, so you can rest assured on that. But I think it's fair that the task force takes my comments into consideration. But if they agree with it and these changes are being made, I don't think it's fair for the board to only get to see those in the December meeting. That was the point of it.
Well, all right, but I don't think it's also fair for the board to have you say that, let's call another meeting for the board to consider my points. I think that we should have the task force evaluate this.
I agree with you. That's what I said. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Anything else, please? Any other remarks? Well, the only last remark I would like to make is that this is, of course, a technical point, and today was a technical discussion, but it is very important in terms of successful coordination with the ISA 600, with the IESBA. And it's the first time that coordination is becoming so demanding and so, how shall I say it, interdependent. So I think we have to handle it carefully, both on the technical side and on the side of not creating impressions that are not really, reflecting the truth, creating impressions that there are gaps and difficulties between us. Yes, there are differences, but we should do our best, as we are doing our best, to bridge them for an overall better outcome. I just want to underline that point, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think this is all for our presentation, and I can invite the task force, you know, if they want to, members, if they want to add anything to before perhaps we close.
Before I thank you all, yes, and before I turn to our PIOB observer. So if any task force member would like to add a comment after the presentation and discussion, please. I don't see any, Sylvie.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so I really want to thank you very much. This has been very hard work, I know. And I want to thank the task force and the staff for all the effort that went into this and for the commitment, which I value, to have a good outcome in December and to resolve all the points that we have heard about from Lisbeth and others. So thank you very, very much. And let me turn to my friend, Robert Buchanan, our PIOB observer, who has been patiently listening to this in the middle of the night.
Thank you, Stavros, and good day to everyone. Good morning from me. Can I, Chair, just endorse your comments just earlier about both the technical nature of the topic, but also the very important implications for the coordination with the IAASB. And it's really wonderful to see the strength of that coordination and the way in which the project has moved on in the technical discussion since the June meeting. It's particularly good to see the progress on the communication issues within the group engagement team. That's something that I think I stressed last time, and it's certainly something that's important for the PIOB, recognising the group engagement partner's ultimate responsibility in respect of independence matters, which is important. Just in proceeding further to finalise, can I just invite the task force just to make sure that the rationale for the different levels of independence requirements within the PI non-PI context and linking with those communication requirements and including in the context of a breach are clearly stated as clearly and simply as possible in the explanatory memorandum that you're going to prepare for the ED. I think that's very important to do that, and I'm sure the task force will be able to do that. And it's good to see the progress on the clarity of the language. There's obviously been some comments today, and Lisbeth has provided those in writing as well, and I'm sure, Lisbeth, that the task force will consider those as part of the responsiveness to the public interest as well. Just noting the further thinking about service providers, thank you for that, and the need to coordinate with the IAASB about that. Of course, that the independence of the service providers is currently out of scope, but it is an important item just to reiterate that it's an outstanding item for the future, not to be forgotten. And Sylvie, just one last comment, if I may, about your reference to the meeting, having a further meeting with the Forum of Firms. I don't recall the level of participation of the regulatory community on this project, but I just wonder whether it might be worthwhile also seeking some engagement with the regulatory community sort of for a fatal flaw review of some kind just before, or a fatal flaw discussion before you finalise the proposals as well, and that would increase the perception that the public interest is being responded to. So thank you, Chair, and thank you to Sylvie for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Robert. Sylvie, you want to add a word on the issue of exposure of regulators? Because I think you have had some.
Yeah, we met with IOSCO and IFER already. When was that? In May, June? And actually, some of the changes that we're presenting are also reflecting the feedback. I mean, I can see with Ken and Carla if there is any appetite to have some kind of a wrap up at some point. I know that from the CAG, actually, we also got some feedback from some of those organizations. So we will see how feasible it is with the calendar to go back. The IESBA, if you were very supportive of the direction. We will see, you know, how we could try to manage something.
Okay, thank you. And of course, let me remind everyone that this is an exposure draft. This is a final standard. And of course, exposure is going to give us ample opportunity to collect views from a variety of stakeholders. Anyway, so I will close this session. I really want to thank you, Sylvie, and the task force and the staff, and thank you all for your participation. This concludes quite a long and stressful meeting, which, however, has contributed decisive steps, clarity, and reflection on a number of very important issues, which I will not repeat. So I want to thank IFAC also for their support and providing the infrastructure for holding this meeting. And I look forward, very hopefully, to see, if not all of you, some of you in December in New York. Let's keep our fingers crossed, and we will see whether that, in fact, can become a case. So thank you all. Be well, be safe, and see you in December. Goodbye.
Right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Be well. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.